to give up? Are you willing to give up some of your power?
That's interesting.
Because it's easy to say that you're against, racism, and to empathize and sympathize and hug me if I've had a terrible racist experience, and tell me you're going to pray for me and do inner healing with me and everything else that, we get into. But are you willing to give up your seat for me?
That's deep.
Those are the questions. Are you willing to sacrifice some of your benefits that you get from being in a position of privilege?
I mean, let's sort of move to sort of the church and racism. I'm going to bring out another book that I like, because this is an excellent book. It's called The Interest, How the British Establishment Resisted the Abolition of Slavery by Dr. Michael Taylor. It's an excellent, excellent book. He started actually talking about, he was studying evangelical approaches to slavery, because what you realize, and the reason I'm going back again, is because the church, the church needs to look at how much it has played a role,
for sure,
in racism and racist ideology. Let's call it racist ideology. So Britain at the time is a Christian country. People use the Bible to support slavery. They use the Bible to support abolition. Freed slaves used the Bible. Well, they wouldn't have been freed there. They would have been slaves that were on the plantation, but they'd come to know Christ, used the Bible as well to sort of say, God has made us in the image of God, and we are allowed to be free. But all these different entities are all using the Bible to serve their ends. Yeah. And I think what I noticed, I say that although it started there, to bring it into this modern space, and what happened last year with George Floyd and how the church responded.
Or lack of response.
Well, and that's it. and that's it. And I think why it is important for the church to respond in these situations. Yeah. I kind of wanted us to look at Britain, because this is where we are. I know it happened in the States, but it definitely was like a powder keg all over the world. Why do you think the church in this country, because this is where we are, hasn't dealt with it, isn't dealing with it, doesn't want to deal with it? Why do you think?
Gosh, there are so many reasons why I think. If you benefit, it's easy to then stay quiet and to deny. And particularly when you still benefit.
Okay, how? Okay, I'm going to stick a pin in that.
Okay.
And because there are many people that I know that would say, I don't think that's the case. So if you still benefit, give me an example of how people are still benefiting.
Well, you only need to look at the difference of wealth between the predominantly white-led churches in this country particularly, not talking about other countries, and the predominantly non-white-led churches. Ease of access, buildings. Ease of being able to get bank accounts and set up charities. Ease of being able to have trading, shops, laws. You only have to look at the disparity of how many non-people of colour are in prominent leadership positions within the church, visibly. Yeah. People always quote the one Anglican Black female bishop.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's one of the only people there, And that's it's almost that thing of, well, if there is one or if there is two, then, we've kind of hit some kind of quota. So therefore, that means we don't have a problem. So the predominantly white-led churches benefit economically, financially, leadership, authority, a multitude of different ways. And even within, I've worked with, white-led churches, lots of different churches, and I've predominantly challenged many around how do they welcome people of different faiths. They will argue that, we're very welcoming, we're very open, we're all of these things, which, I don't want to demonize, white-led church, because predominantly, individuals, absolutely beautiful hearts, beautiful spirits. However, it's the lack of awareness that when I come through the doors and I see nobody in your leadership, and you're the church, you're supposed to reflect the kingdom of heaven. So I can understand in, not accept, but I can understand in worldly institutions why things may be whatever. But in the church, I expect it to be different. You should look different to the world. So when I come in and see the exact same models, structures, and behaviors in the church, when I come in and you then tell me to conform and I must change my kind of way of worship to yours, you are reinforcing these racial stereotypes that says this Western way is superior. When I come in and everything has to be in your language, and I get all of the different arguments that people will come with that, but however, there is something around the church's way and the church's approach that should be different to the world's approach.
I would also say people are bombarded with things that are important. When you're in a church setting, there are so many competing importances.
Yeah.
So in a nation where, I don't know, how much, do we make up 13% of, I think black people make up 13%?
They make up 13% in London.
In London. So how much, I don't know how much
I think
we're
it's
making.
actually only 3% or so in around that region across the whole of the UK.
So it's a small number, it's below 20%, right?
Yeah.
And they would say, look, this is a predominantly white country. Why should racism matter to us? Of course, we think George Floyd murder was terrible. We all think that's terrible. But why should addressing this, why should we make this a priority in the midst of all the multiple priorities? Do you see what I'm saying?
Gosh, there's so many ways to answer that question. Why should it be important? If we think in Proverbs, basically 31, verse 8 to 9, it basically says, and this is paraphrasing, and it's paraphrasing based on the Bible Project, that says basically, open your mouth and speak for those who cannot speak for themselves.
Yes.
Open your mouth and judge righteously and plead the cause of the poor and the needy. You go back into Jeremiah, it talks about for those in positions of authority who govern or who are leaders, or who, even if you don't think you're in a position of authority, as in by position, by, as I said, being that you are the dominant ethnic group,
Yes.
then you are going to benefit and be in a place of privilege and a place of power over underserved, minoritized groups. So from the people in those positions, in Jeremiah, it talks about bring about justice and righteousness, rescue the disadvantaged, don't tolerate oppression or violence against the immigrant, the orphan, the widow. And then it talks about actively deliver those who are oppressed out of the hand of the oppressor. These are actual laws as a Christian. These are direct commands that the Lord has placed and said, this is my expectation of you. It says, do no wrong, no violence to the immigrant, the fatherless, the stranger amongst you, nor the widow, neither shed innocent blood in this place. And then from God's standpoint, in Psalm 146, they talk about the God who made heaven and earth, the sea, all therein, he who's the keeper of all truth. He executes judgment for the oppressed. He upholds like the complaints of the oppressed. He gives food to the hungry. The Lord looses the prisoners, opens the eyes of the blind, raises them who are bowed down, depressed, loosed. The Lord loveth righteousness. The Lord preserves the immigrant, the stranger. He relieves the father. So, to be honest, and then you take that into the New Testament. Of John talks about it. Jesus talks about it. He says, that, your duty. I'm so passionate about this. Your duty as somebody who is a follower and a believer of Christ and a believer of God is not just to disagree with racism, but is to actively oppose it and to actively set those who are oppressed free. It's your actual duty. So that's the fundamental reason in my mind, if for no other. And that is not even touching on moral, legal, humane, decency. There's a myriad. But if you want to bring it down to the core, it's your duty. It's what you were placed here to do. It is a command on all of us. And, And my argument often has been, many churches have done amazing things, I say amazing things, maybe amazing things in their mind, people argue differently. But many, we've gone on missionaries. Many predominantly white churches or white-led churches have, set up lots of orphanages in Africa. You've gone over to Africa to deal with the needy, the poor in your mind is what you see there. And, bringing all of these things to bring children, you want to give shoes and all of those things. So you feel the need to do that in somewhere in my mind that, you feel is very safe. It seems righteous, it seems the right thing. But in your own backyard, you have nothing to say on the oppression of those who is your neighbour, your next door neighbour, those who you work with, those who come church with you. It doesn't make sense. That doesn't add up. And the other side of it is that I think over in this country, we are very covert about the way, not only that we talk about racism, but the way that racism is handled. So people will, revert to laws and think that we've got equal rights laws and we have this and we have that and we have the other. Because we don't have guns over here, we don't see the violence and the oppressions. We look to the George Floyds that, circulated around the world. Obviously, everyone knows the horror of what happened there. But what they didn't know is that at the same time, there was a young man over here who was murdered by the police, and it had been going, and his trial was happening at the same time. Not one person in this country talked about that. And the police officer was convicted and he was sentenced to jail. So there's lots of things that happen right here in this country, but the overtness, the lack of media attention,
the covertness.
Sorry, the covertness, the lack of media attention, the lack of a real heart, compassion. It's easy to be ignorant. It's easy to stand behind not knowing. And the other thing that really, I guess I'm challenged when it comes to this area is that you often find that these conversations are, for example, with people of colour.
Exactly.
And we are trying to get into the mind of why people of non-colour don't do these things. And I guess it goes back to that, discussion about having the other side of the story. I want to see church leaders and people and Christians of non-colour answer the same questions. Why don't you stand up for racism? Why don't you think it's important? Instead of me trying to get inside your mind and trying to why don't you explain? How do you rationalise and justify your lack of seeing this as important, or how do you prioritise other things over this? Talk me through your process. And then we might get a more, richer or deeper understanding, or people might start to confront and have to deal with some very hard, very uncomfortable questions to themselves that says, what is this about? Why don't I want to get into that space? What am I fearful of?
And it's all very, very good. I think there's also, I like to keep things very simple. I think it's just also about humility.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes we just have to be humble,
Yes.
and sometimes the humility allows God to tell us things that we find very hard to hear.
Yeah.
And listening to you talk just reminded me, how Jesus says that, if you give somebody even a glass of water, you're doing it unto me. And how he says in Matthew, you didn't visit me in hospital, you didn't clothe me. And they're like, but you weren't there. And he's like, yes, I was there. Anything you do to the least, you're doing to me. And the perfect example is Paul, when he's, persecuting all these Christians and he meets Jesus on the Damascus Road. And what does Jesus say to him? Paul, why are you persecuting me? He doesn't say those people. And I think we have to understand that, it's back to what you say. We all are made in the image of God. There is not a single thing that has been made, a single person that hasn't been made by God. That means that they are made in the image of God. We just have to remember to keep it simple, we are part of a body whether we like it or not. Whether you don't like me or not, you don't really have a choice of whether I'm part of the body or not, right?
Yeah.
It says if one part of the body suffers, we all suffer. And I think this is the thing about some self-reflection or allowing God to speak to us, because it's, you know, him to challenge us, is we have to, I think I don't want to speak for white people because I don't know.
Yeah.
But if you think you are benefiting from something, it's the same with, like, I guess, women's liberation, right? Men thought they were fine with women just not doing anything. But the reality is you are also suffering if there's a whole bunch of people that aren't able to fulfill the fullness of who God has said they are. Yeah. And I just think we have to sort of allow God to cause us to see outside of the things we've bought into. And we've bought into a lot of lies, so much that we don't even, I mean, isn't that what deception is? You don't know you're deceived until you're no longer deceived. And I think if we would just, this thing of humility and going, you know what, okay, God, maybe I don't think I have a race issue here. I'm not I'm not racist, blah, 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 whatever the things are. My church, maybe, we have a diverse body, whatever. But if we would just allow God to talk to us, maybe we'd find out something else.
It's that self-reflection in that almost asking yourself the hard question of, if you were to really do justice, what are you willing to give up? Are you willing to give up some of your power?
That's interesting.
Because it's easy to say that you're against, racism, and to empathize and sympathize and hug me if I've had a terrible racist experience, and tell me you're going to pray for me and do inner healing with me and everything else that, we get into. But are you willing to give up your seat for me?
That's deep.
Those are the questions. Are you willing to sacrifice some of your benefits that you get from being in a position of privilege?
Right.
And when I use the term privilege loosely, because I believe I am privileged. I believe many people of color are privileged. We have different privileges and we have, different ways. But when you're, in terms of this particular context, when you're in that position of power, when you're in that position of, I benefit from being part of the dominant group. Am I willing to step away from that?
Yeah.
Am I willing to be ostracized by, am I willing to step away from my dominant group to fight for somebody of a different group where I might not even be accepted in that new group, and then I'm ostracized from, all of those things start to come up, and it touches on back to Carl Rittenhouse, in that he did not shoot and kill Black people. He ended up shooting and killing white people who were protesting on the wrongness of and treatment of Black people, and they're standing up and protesting cost them their life.
Yes,
and it goes back to those questions, I want to fight, I want to do this, but am I willing to give up my privileges, my benefits? And it reminded me of, I can't remember the lady that does the blue-eyed, brown-eyed experiments.
Yeah, the teacher, I can see her face, the teacher, yeah.
And one of the things she did in one of her meetings with, I'm not sure if it was teachers or a group of leaders anyway, and she challenged them on this notion of, of the white people in her audience who were saying, I'm not racist. And she said, okay, you say you're not racist, you say that you love all people, you say that, you've had all of these experiences, fine. She said, I want you to put your hand up or stand up if any of you would exchange places with a Black person.
And nobody did.
Not one. Not one person. And so she said, so don't sit there and say you don't see it. It's not you, you don't know it, you're not aware.
That's good.
Because not one of you were willing to trade. But you can ask other people in people groups, would you be willing to trade? Yes, they're going to say, what, to get those privileges and benefits? Of course.
That's good.
And the one last thing I'd say on this, certainly from my perspective, and it was something that God spoke to me about, was because you come from that place of having oppressed somebody, your fears is that they are going to do to you
that's true.
What you've done unto them.
That's correct.
Even if you are not someone who was, racist and actively oppressing somebody. So my thing is, if you have those fears and we have those thoughts in society, how do we heal both sides so that this side does not rise up to be the oppressor, having been oppressed, And this side is willing to give up some of their power because they don't fear becoming the oppressed.
Yes.
You have to hear both sides. You have to talk about both sides, because as long as you only hear it from this, you will never change the power and the iniquity, and you will never start to share, some of those things.
That's so good. And I think this is why, coming back to, Jesus, it's why we need God.
Yes.
Because none of this stuff can be done without, people moving in forgiveness, people moving in repentance, all of these things. These aren't things that we can do of ourselves. What does it say? It takes God to love God, right? And it takes God's love to love each other. But if we are prepared to, I keep thinking it's kind of back to where we started when I was talking about what Jesus commands. It's not also, we have to talk about the fact that when Jesus says certain things, they're not suggestions.
No, exactly.
It's not, if you feel like loving somebody, love them. He's like, love each other. That's what he says. And he doesn't say, love each other when somebody's kind to you. He says, love your enemy. That's what he says.
Exactly.
And I think I keep being reminded of, in Revelations, when there's the image, John sees all these people around the throne, and it says every nation, every tribe, every tongue worshipping. It doesn't say the white people, the Chinese people, the Indians, the blacks, some at the back, it says every tribe, nation, and that's where we're working towards, right? And it is in our interest, especially if we are called as believers. Come, kingdom of heaven come, isn't it? Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Kingdom of heaven come, will of God be done on earth as it is in heaven. We are trying to draw the reality of heaven into this now, right? So it is in our interest, because heaven doesn't look like a bunch of different people sitting over there, white people, as I said, all these sort of different groups of people. It's human beings all worshipping the Lord, acknowledging that he is God. And the quicker we get this done, the quicker a lot of things would shift. Because I personally think there are things that are being held up. There are certain things in society that are being held up. There are certain things, our growth as a body, that are being held up because we are refusing or resisting dealing with things that God is asking us to deal with. It's not just, I'm telling you to deal with it. God is saying, deal with this stuff. Do you know what I'm saying?
And just to jump in there. So it's in the interest of the church, because God judges the church first and foremost. He doesn't come to judge the world. He's like, I'm coming to judge you as my people in what you did or didn't do. It was done in his name. The damage was done in his name. So it's only going to be in his name that we can rectify it.
That's deep. That's deep. That's deep. I want to almost just end on that. I want you to say it one more time, because I think it's extremely powerful. Because at the end of the day, the Bible calls us ambassadors, right? We are here to represent him. So that when Jesus said, when you see me, you see the Father. So it should be that when people see us, they see Jesus, right? And for us to have some kind of legitimacy in the world we're in, we're told to preach the gospel. People are meant to look at you and I and the people around us and say, oh, this is what Jesus looks like, right? And you said that last thing that you said, that it's just so powerful. Would you say it again?
So the damage was done in his name. So it's going to take and be in his name to undo.
Selah.
In the history of the world, punishment has never achieved what we wanted it to achieve. We do not have safe societies right now. And we have had an abundance of a punitive approach.
Right.
We know from psychology, from, academia, from lived experience, from all of the different areas, it's not effective.